I'm going to talk now about using MPC to provide a comprehensive cryptocurrency or digital asset protection platform. But as I mentioned earlier today, it goes beyond that specific application. In that specific application, it's very important, as I'll explain why soon, but it talks in general about how we can use MPC to go a step further, which is to prevent fraudulent key usage in cases where that's very, very problematic. So that's what we're going to do now. The motivation is very clear. People are putting a lot of money into these cryptocurrencies. Wisely or not, that's up to them to decide. But a lot of that has been stolen or lost. And there is a strong need for a solution to provide strong protections against the loss of these currencies. It's true, again, cryptocurrencies today, it can be digital assets, it can be essentially anything that is protected using a signing key. When we talk about protecting digital assets, in general, we can think about a number of different levels of protection. Specifically, we're focused on cryptocurrency at the moment. So the first is to talk about a custody solution. In a custody solution, you have an organization that's providing some platform that will ensure or prevent theft of a digital asset. But there are not many transactions taking place. This is like you have investment, you're investing $1 billion in some cryptocurrency, you want to have that in custody at the bank, and you'll only take that out very rarely, you'll only move funds very rarely. You don't want it to take too long, because if it takes you 2 weeks to get your funds out and the market is crashing, that's going to be very problematic, but it doesn't need to take seconds or minutes to get it done. So you can have a complex transaction that would be acceptable and possibly or often even desired or mandated. We're talking very large amounts of funds and it'll be offered to high-end customers. Another setting you can talk about is exchanges. So in exchange, there is high turnover. Okay, here you're actually transferring US dollars or other euro, whatever, to cryptocurrencies and back, but also between the cryptocurrencies, you can be transferring money very, very often. And there's a real need to speed up those transactions. And in fact, real cryptocurrency exchanges, I was actually amazed when I heard this the first time, they can guarantee you that you can get your funds back within something like 2 weeks, which is absurd. They will often do it much faster than that, but it will take them days. It's not something you can just say, okay, I want my money back, and this happens very, very quickly. It's a very, very slow process, and the reason why it's a very slow process is because of the fear of theft. There's a huge amount of value in these currencies right now. Because of that fear of theft, a lot of the funds, the majority is stored in cold storage. So it's disconnected from the network, and they have different levels, different sizes of wallets which are disconnected. And the physical procedure required to open them can be complex. So you need a number of people to come together to open a vault, to go and get the disk to connect it up. And it takes a very long time and is really absurd if you think about what the promise of cryptocurrency is, at least. It should take so long makes absolutely no sense. And a solution for an exchange you would want to enable them to be able to do this much, much faster. And also to have flexibility. So on a much larger vault or a much larger wallet, there would be a more complex transaction. On a medium size, it would be simpler. On a small one, it could even be fully automatic. You'd want different levels of protection and procedures for different amounts. And you want that the usability or the speed and the trade-off with security to be one which is positive. And just would like to jump to the end without telling you how yet. A very large exchange in the world is using our solution and managed to reduce the transaction time within just a month or so of installing the software from a few days to less than an hour, and then a little bit more time to being less than a minute. Okay, and that obviously in terms of their business processes and the value they provide to their customers is something that is huge, And they do that without compromising on security by using something which is MPC based, which is what I'm going to present today. You can also talk about wallets, which are for end users in smaller amounts, but I'm not going to focus on that. Now, when we talk about a solution for this problem, the primary thing we have to understand, it's not about key theft. And the reason it's not about key theft is because the way these things work is that I deposit $1 billion worth of cryptocurrency asset into an account. That means that there is a single signing key that protects that currency. And if I sign once, I can transfer all of that money to someone else. And because of the nature of the beast, it's an irreversible operation. So I don't need to steal the key, I just need to use it once and I get absolutely everything. So we need something that, providing very strong physical protection is not going to give you actually what you need, because if I can get to something which has access to that physical, like to an HSM or something like that, I can still carry out the operation. We also need backup and disaster recovery, because if you lose your key, you lose all your money and it's irreversible again. You cannot get it back if you've lost the key. And in this, you also need to have flexibility, which is what I mentioned before, this fine-tuning of security versus usability. You also have to have broad support for different coins and systems and different signing algorithms, different standards. And importantly, you want something which is not going to depend on the specific ledger or platform that you're using. It should be relevant for all different types of ledgers and any type of cryptocurrency. That makes it relevant going forward. It means, again, that you're able to support very quickly different things which are happening, and you're not specifically tied to features that Bitcoin gives you and Ethereum may not give you. Okay, I'll give you that example in just one moment. So what are the existing solutions for this? One is disconnected wallets or hardware. Again, they're not flexible. They have very poor usability and transaction execution time. And also they actually have questionable security. At least the consumer hardware wallets have been shown to be broken multiple times. Side channels are very effective. So these have not been built very well. And on the exchange side or custodial side, this can work, but then you have a piece of hardware sitting in a vault that requires 5 people to get on an airplane to fly to a certain place in order to access. This is not going to give you very fast transaction time when the market is crashing, or even just when you want to move your funds around at a reasonable pace. The second is a hardware security module that is connected. Again, it's not flexible. It doesn't necessarily support the algorithms that you need. There are some solutions being offered that use HSMs, but they use the HSM to wrap the key inside and they extract it and then do the operation because the HSM doesn't support that curve that's being used in this specific cryptocurrency. Other HSMs actually have adapted and you can carry out the operation inside, but it doesn't protect against fraudulent key usage once it's connected, so you're solving the wrong problem. And again, it typically doesn't support many of the standards as well. And the final one is multisig. Multisig sounds very much like MPC. You can define that there are 3 signing keys, and 2 out of those 3 need to be used in order to carry out the operation. Right? So it sounds very much like it. The problem is it's not supported by all ledgers. This is the exact example where Bitcoin supports it, but Ethereum doesn't. So if I'm using that to protect my funds, it doesn't give me the flexibility that I need. Even when it is supported, it has a limited definition. I can't support very arbitrary definitions of whatever I want in terms of 5 out of 8 of this in one group, or 3 out of 4 in another group, and 6 out of 12 in another group. Very complex definitions are not supported, and even if they are supported, they become expensive, because the transaction fees become expensive when you use elaborate multisig, and that can be of considerable importance in an exchange type scenario. And most importantly though, or I guess just as importantly, it doesn't support very essential operations like employee replacement. If I'm in exchange or I'm a custodian, employees come and go. And if I used multisig, and I said 2 out of these 3 people need to sign, and one of them leaves the company, they have that key. I can't leave that key there because they know the key already. So what I actually have to do is now transfer all of the funds that are related to that employee, or I have to rely on the fact the employee never got the key even though it was in their hands. Neither of those makes any sense. And so what happens is that, and if an employee joins, I don't want to enable them also to be a part of this group. I have to start transferring all my funds, which make no sense whatsoever. In contrast, we're going to look at an MPC solution which generates a single signature, a standard signature. In terms of the ledger and everything, it looks exactly like a standard single signature. But it supports elaborate multi-sig type functionality, but much richer and without the disadvantages of multi-sig. So we're going to talk about threshold signing. Again, threshold signing is a specific type of MPC which relates to signature, digital signature signing. So threshold cryptography, again, was studied in the 1990s, but then abandoned. And what it says is the following. You can define a set of n parties and say that any subset of size m of those n parties is needed in order to generate a signature. And the private key is shared amongst those parties. And what's important is that, and then you need what we call a quorum. A quorum is that subset of m parties. And no subset of size smaller than m should be able to compute any signature whatsoever. That's what a threshold signing protocol does. And there are a couple of very important features which we need to take into account. One is that all the parties in the quorum agree on the message to be signed. So it's not a situation where, okay, just the m parties, the quorum agrees to sign a message, but maybe an adversary can influence what they're signing. If they don't all agree to sign exactly the same message, then nothing will be signed. And in addition, every new signature requires a quorum to agree. It's not that once the quorum agreed to sign on one message, you can suddenly generate a whole lot of different signatures. Okay. A tool that we use for this is called secret sharing. But before I talk about how we do secret sharing, I just want to say secret sharing itself does not suffice. So secret sharing is a method of sharing a key amongst a set of parties with the same idea that any subset of size m can reconstruct the key, and no subset of size less than m can learn anything whatsoever about the key. So it's similar in terms of the idea of this threshold and this quorum. However, at the end, when you want to come together, you actually reconstruct the key. And for that reason, it doesn't help us, because if you want to sign using this type of technology, then what you would do is you would reconstruct the key and then generate the signature. Okay, so you recover the key and now you can generate the signature. But once it's reconstructed, you can sign any message you want. So maybe 10 of us in this room agreed to sign on the message transferring me $1,000 for this wonderful lecture. But once we all brought the key together, I can transfer $100,000 and you can't do anything about it because I have the key now. In addition to be able to sign on a different message, once you reconstruct, if you reconstruct the key to me, I can now sign on many, many messages and give myself $100,000 and also all of my cousins. Okay, and you can't stop me from doing that. So secret sharing itself doesn't solve the problem, and threshold cryptography uses secret sharing, but without actually reconstructing at any time. So let's talk a little bit about secret sharing. We'll talk about Shamir sharing. And here's an example of how you do 2 out of n secret sharing. Okay? The idea is as follows. You choose a random line. Okay, you choose a random line that cuts the x-axis at the y-axis, at k, the value of the key. It cuts the y-axis at the value of the key. So p of 0, when x equals 0, then that's the value of the key. And you give everyone a different point on that line. Okay, so everyone has a different point on that line. And what I argue is firstly that any 2 parties can find the line and therefore get the key. Why? High school geometry, right? Given 2 points on the line, you can draw the line and then find where it hits the y-axis, and that's the value. But no single party knows anything about the key. Why is that? Because any gradient is possible. If I just have this point, the line could be this, it could be that, it could be that. I have no idea what the line is, and therefore I know nothing whatsoever about the key. So we can distribute these points to everyone in the room. I get P of 1, Bob gets P of 2, Marty P of 3, and so on and so forth. No single person knows anything, and any pair can come together and easily get the value. And this can be, I won't go into it, but this can be generalized into any any threshold by just taking a polynomial instead of a degree 1 polynomial, a degree m minus 1 polynomial, but let's ignore that for now. Okay, so we can do this secret sharing very efficiently, and it's very appealing. But we can actually go further. So threshold secret sharing defines a basic quorum where no subset of size less than m can learn anything. We can also define what we call more complex access structures. So we can talk about sets A, B, C, and D, and we could require a basic quorum inside each set, but then you can define that you need either a quorum in A or in B, as well as a quorum in either in C or in D. So you can build very complex logic about who needs to authorize the operation. If you think about a custody solution, you could have the bank, a customer, and a trustee, and you'd need, within the bank, for very large deposits, you would need 3 out of the 5 out of some investment group, plus 4 out of 10 of the administrator group, and you would need at least 6 out of 8 at the customer, and 2 out of 3 at the trustee, otherwise you can't get anything out. But you can define these access structures to be complex or simple, and you can see exactly where the trade-off starts coming in. The more complex the operation, the more people who need to authorize it, it'll give you a higher security, but it will take longer. And the simpler it is, then you would have something which would be much, much faster, but would be less secure. But still, even just saying 3 out of 5 in a certain group already requires something that is going to be much more secure than just a single, getting to one machine and just using the key. So that's the sort of trade-off that you can get, and enables you to mirror sort of policies that exist in the physical world now in the digital world. And if you have a really complex access structure, you don't need people to come together physically to the same place. It can be much, much, much faster than anything else. Okay, so we actually have multi-party protocols with security for malicious adversaries that support these access structures. We have support for ECDSA, ECDSA, and Schnorr, which are essentially these signing algorithms used in this entire cryptocurrency world. It's secure for malicious adversaries, so any subsets that's not a quorum cannot sign, even if they're malicious. They run specific attack software. And it supports also distributed key generation, which is really important, because often people think, okay, so to sign you need this approved subset, but to generate the key it had to be in some place at least at some given time, and that's not true. You can even generate the key in a way that was distributed from the start. So it was never in any one place to start with. To use another MPC protocol to generate the key in the beginning. It also achieves proactive security, which means that you need to breach simultaneously a full quorum. You can't go ahead and slowly breach one person after another. And all of that is possible by the protocols that we have. We also support these rich access structures that I talked about. And here's an important point which sort of like comes up when you want to try and deploy this type of solution in a real world setting, but we wouldn't have ever thought of if we were writing an academic paper. And here the idea is that we want to distinguish between online signing parties and offline authorization parties. And it comes out of the understanding that MPC protocols in general require all of the participants to be online and interact at the same time. But if I want this 3 out of 5 from this group and 2 out of 4 from another group to authorize the operation, and then they all need to be online at the same time, what happens if they're in different geographic locations and someone is and they're sleeping at different times? Or what happens if I happen to be on the train at that time and I'm not connected? Or if I'm in a really important meeting and I don't connect at that time, I don't get the message, and other people then are free, but later they're in an important meeting and they're not connected at that exact time. So we want to have online parties that are all connected, and these would typically be servers that are in the organization. And offline authorization parties who would receive a notification on their mobile, they'll look and see, oh, okay, this is the transaction. I know that Yehuda Lindell is leaving the bank and taking his $1 billion with him. I don't know what atmosphere I'm in right now.
Or what bank?
What bank? And I know about that transaction because I was informed that it's going to happen, so I approve. Or wait a second, I know that that is not an approved transaction. I'm not touching it. And then, but they can work asynchronously. So I can approve, and an hour later Bob can approve, and it will go through as soon as a quorum has approved. This will be the more complex. Obviously, it will take longer because we need these people to physically go into their mobile phones and approve. But they don't need to come to any single physical location, meaning that it can be much, much faster than anything that we had beforehand. And that's the distinction that we have here. And I wanted to stress this: offline authorization is not giving a password to the online party saying yes, it's fine, but it's cryptographically enforced, and in fact, they hold sub-shares of the key as well. So they hold shares of the key. Unless they authorize, the online parties are not able to carry out the operation. So in a custody setting, it could look something like this. You have the service provider, which could be a bank, and you have 2 online servers and 1 offline approval. And in the customer or trustee, you have 2 others, and then they could approve or not approve. And you could set up also whatever structures you want around this. Here you could have like different groups with different saying, you need the online signer and at least 1 of the 2 offline over here, and here you need the online signer, at least 2 of the 3 offline over here. And all this can be defined in a very easy way. And this is in the product. I'm not talking about a theoretical MPC project. There's an actual product out there that does this and is actually being used today. Okay. So the threshold cryptographic signing protocol is clearly at the cryptographic core. And when you're a cryptographer, that's what you're most excited about. But it's actually not enough, because when you build a platform, there are many, many other things that you need to be taken into account, and all need to work together. So for example, you need secure backup and disaster recovery, because when you're a bank holding $100 billion in assets, it's not that nice when you lose all of those assets. You need to support funny things that people do for other reasons and may not even be relevant, but they're already doing it, so you have to support it. Like in this world, often there's key derivation, BIP32, BIP44 key derivation. People generate a master key and then want to derive keys later on. It makes sense for a wallet because you want to only back up your original master key. In the custody and exchange setting, it's not that relevant because you can always just generate new keys as long as you can back them all up if you have a backup method. Proactive security, what I mentioned beforehand, you want to be able to refresh and have this situation where you have to breach everyone at the same time. And also you need this party administration of adding and removing parties, and all of these have to work together with the core threshold signing protocol. So they all have to fit together, all of these building blocks. And you also want modularity so that if I'm doing ECDSA or Schnorr, it doesn't make a difference to a lot of the other things as well. Only the core signing protocol will make a difference. Okay, let's talk about backup and disaster recovery. Here is one, something I found online. You can actually get your private key printed on metal. If you have, your own wallet or something and you want to store it somewhere in the safety deposit box in the bank, fine, that's okay. Obviously, this is not of relevance at all to the type of settings that we're talking about, okay? And it's extremely, this is being sold as something which, can resist fire and water and okay.
This is the MacGuffin in a Dan Brown movie, right? It's
Exactly.
just a bad experience for everybody.
Exactly. So why do we need backup? Well, we read recently about a guy who apparently maybe died in India. No one really knows. And lots of money went missing, but then they reconstructed and saw actually that the money already even wasn't there necessarily beforehand. A lot of strange stories, but we certainly need to back up.
Also, it might be the second time he's died.
Second time he's
Under
died,
mysterious
yeah.
circumstances, it's a little...
Maybe he has 9 lives. Now, this issue is this is a very important issue for any individual, but let's be serious enough to understand that for a bank offering a custody solution or an exchange, this is not about a single person losing some money. This is about the entire, a bank, even a bank at the size of Citi, if they lost all of their digital assets, or let's say if they lost their physical assets, they do they do custody for now, and not cryptocurrency. That's probably more than they're worth, right? So we want a backup which will, we want to work in a way we generate a public key in a distributed way, store the private key very safely, and use it for backup. That's the idea. The model is, and we've actually spoken to customers who this is the way they work. They, and I wouldn't say it because it sounds like too James Bond for me, but there are people in customers who actually, that this is the way they work. They actually have these bunkers with vaults, where they have disconnected HSMs that they use to protect their most valuable keys. Okay, so the idea is that you're going to take one of those HSMs, or not one, but multiple of those for redundance, and they're going to store like a 4,000-bit RSA key, maybe an 8,000-bit RSA key, I don't care, and they're going to put the private key in those vaults, and the public key will be what we use for backup. And you may be thinking that it's actually very easy. What's the problem? We have this key which is shared among the parties, so each party will encrypt its share of the key under that RSA public key. We want it to be an RSA public key and not a specific one that's nice for us cryptographers, because we want it to fit in with what people actually, have HSMs to do this in the actual, in reality. So everyone encrypts it under that public key, and you store all of those in redundant places in all different places around the world, but it's encrypted, so who cares? And you're done. So what's the problem? If it was so easy, then it wouldn't be interesting for a slide. So what's the problem? There are people in this room who have adversarial minds, I know, because they're cryptographers. And cryptographers have to have adversarial minds because that's the way they work. So what's the problem?
What problem?
What problem? So the problem is as follows. What happens if some of the parties are corrupted during the key generation and they write garbage to the backup?
They can recover it later.
Then you can't recover the key later on. So you might think, oh, why would an adversary want to do that? They're not gaining money, they're just making someone else lose money. Well, welcome to the real world. Adversaries do very interesting things for many different reasons. So what we do is we use something called zero knowledge proofs, which are also now become known to the world in general. And it's a way of proving something that's true without revealing anything but that fact. So one thing you can think of is that you could prove that, let's say there's someone who's colorblind, that it can't distinguish between red and green, and they want me to, and I tell them, no, these are two different cards. One's a red card and one's a green card, and they want me to prove that to them. So how can I convince them that that's the case? It seems very hard. I mean, they don't see any difference. So what they can do is they can take the cards and write the number 1 and 2 on the back and show me, and I can say, oh, the red card is 1 and the green is 2. And then they can put behind their back and each time take out a random card where the number is facing to them. And I have to tell them each time whether it's 1 or 2. I don't say red or green, I just say 1 or 2. And then they can see, okay, yeah, that's 1 and that's 2. And then we do this like 80 times. And the probability that if they were the same color, I would be right all those 80 times is almost 2 to the minus 80, because I'd be wrong each time. But the person who's verifying has no idea which card is red and which card is green. They have no idea because all they saw were the numbers. So that's why this is zero knowledge in that sense. It reveals no information, but actually convinces them of the fact. So what we do is we have each party encrypt its share of the key under this RSA key, but then also provide a zero knowledge proof that it encrypted the correct share. And then based on that, the flow that we have is the follows. In order to generate an account, you generate a key in a distributed manner. Each party then backs up its share of the key and provides this publicly verifiable zero knowledge proof. This is all sent to multiple redundant centers who all verify that all the proofs are correct, does the backup of the, or stores the backup of these key shares in very redundant ways, sends back an authorization, yes, everything is fine, and we get authorization from everyone. Only then do we transfer the funds into the account. So as long as you can trust that at least one of these backup servers is still honest, because they receive and each one receives and verifies the zero knowledge proof, you now know that the backup is valid and you can go ahead and transfer the funds in. Okay, so it seems a bit paranoid, but this is a big problem we want to solve.
How do you verify the proof,
So this is, math.
Yeah.
We can do it. Trust me. No,
That's the
it's-
third.
A lot of confidence in you, right?
it's,
That's the third time.
yeah, whenever anyone says trust me, right, you run. Okay, so I'll tell you what we do to make you trust me, okay? One, where we have academic reputation and credibility, but you should ignore that, in my opinion. We have our protocol specification verified by an external cryptographer, independent. We have the implementation verified by another cryptographer that the spec actually matches the implementation. And if anybody really wants, and under NDA, they can go through every single line of code and do their own code review. Under NDA, just for IP reasons. So that's as much as I think anybody can do. And that last thing I told you, I don't know that there are many vendors who'll tell you that. In fact, I was at a meeting a few weeks ago at a bank in Europe, and they asked me, why should we trust you? I said, don't trust. They have cryptographers that don't trust me. Take the code under NDA and just go over every line. And they looked at me like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
We've never heard any vendor say they're actually willing to do that. And I'm willing. It won't be an easy task for them, but
I bet they
no
won't
problem.
do it. I bet they offer
They won't do it either, but they can, and I really don't mind if they do. And if you're building a custody solution where you're going to put $100 billion in that, you may very much want to, and it's fine with me. In fact, I'd be really happy if they do it. In addition, we support standard key derivation, and here I want to show you something very cool. Cool for me, I think it's cool. Which is, we saw how to do RSA in secret computation. But it made a lot of sense because it's a very clean algebraic function that can be separated. Standard key derivation uses SHA hash function, which just is a complete mess. It's XORs and shifts and ANDs, and it has no structure. How could you possibly compute that function without knowing what you're doing? So we use something called Garbled Circuits. Garbled Circuits is a way of computing in an oblivious manner. You don't know what you're computing. And the idea is that you can convert any function into a circuit, a Boolean circuit with ANDs and XORs, and then you encrypt, so to speak, that circuit and then compute it in an oblivious manner. Now that conversion of the function into a circuit can be expensive, but for the functions that we consider, it's actually very efficient. So AES, for example, has 6,400 AND gates and about 20-something thousand XOR gates. Cryptographers know a lot of very strange things. That's one of them. And that might sound like a lot, but in fact, what I'll show you now, we can do this garbled circuit type computation in under a millisecond. Okay. So this is I'm going to show you how to garble a circuit. So this is an AND gate, a friendly AND gate. It has 2 input wires, 1 output wire. UV is input, W is output. And this is its truth table. Okay, so this is exactly the dating game we saw beforehand. 2 ones is a 1, but all other combinations gives you 0. Now what we do is we replace each of those 0 1s with random symmetric keys, or random values, long random values. So you have KU0 and KU1 that represent the 0 1 value, KUV, K1V that, and all of these are independent random values. If I just give you KU0, you have no idea if it represents 0 or 1 because it's just a random value and they just look the same if you don't actually know what the correlation is. Now, if I were to give you this table in permuted order, and I gave you one wire, one of the values on each of the input wires, so you'd be able to look up the correlation. You'd be able to see, okay, if I gave you KU0 and KV1, then I could take this row and know that the output is KW0. Would you know whether you got the 0 value or the 1 value? You would.
In the output or in the inputs?
Both, everything.
Okay.
Why?
Position.
Not position. I permuted the order of the table.
You know the inputs.
You know, I just gave you K0, KV1. You don't know what they're correlated to. Look at the table. I gave you the whole table.
There are only 2 values that it could have in there.
Yeah, 0, 1, but that doesn't mean anything, so it could be 0, 1. But I want you to know which one it is.
You see the whole table, so you see 3 times.
Perfect. You see that KW0, this value appears 3 times. and this appears only once. So you know that this is the 0 value and that's the 1 value. But then if you know that's the 1 value, you know that both of these are the 1 value. And if you know both these are the 1 value, you know that these are the 0 values. So this doesn't work. But what I can do instead is I can give you 4 encryptions. So I encrypt KW0 under KU0 and KV0. And encrypt KW0 under KU0 and KV1, all the possibilities. And then if I give you KU0 and KV1, you try and decrypt each of these ciphertexts. They're in permuted order, so you don't see the order. You try and decrypt, and the first one you fail, and this one you succeed, and you got KW0. So you mapped the output. Do you know whether it correlates to 0 or 1 now? No, because it's just a random string. You have no idea what you've done. So you've actually computed an AND gate in a completely oblivious manner. You've done computation without knowing what you've done. And now you can take these things and you can combine them together to one huge 3-gate circuit in the following way. Okay, so we have 2 ANDs and an ORs. The first thing we do is you go and we write random values on each of the wires, okay, which are correlated to 0 and 1, but they're all independently random. And then you write these 3 tables, which are the translation tables, the encrypted tables that enable you to go from input to output. And finally, you provide what we call output translation tables, which when you get to the output here, you want to know whether you got 0 or 1, so that we can tell you, because you're on the output, you're allowed to know what you got. And once you've got all of this, I want you now to compute this circuit on the inputs 0, 1, 0, 1, without knowing what you've done. So I give you the values KA0, KB1, KC0, and KD1 because they correlate to the input 0, 1, 0, 1. I gave you 4 random values. You have no idea what value they represent. And then what you do is you say, okay, fine, I know these 2 inputs. So I go to this table and I try to decrypt. And I can get the third value. I get the 3rd line here. That's the only one that will decrypt correctly. And once I've done that, I now have K0E, so that goes up here. And now I have KA, I have the value on the A wire and the E wire. I don't know what they correlate to, but I have them. And I can go to the left-hand table and try to decrypt, and that's the only ciphertext that decrypts. And then I can take that KF value and put it there, again, not knowing what it is, but here I actually now do know because I have the output translation. But meanwhile, I go to the other side and I have KE0 and KD1. This is an OR gate now, so there's 1, 0, and 3 1s, and this decrypts this value, and I get that. And then I can look at the output translation table and know that I got 0 and 1. So I know that I got 0 and 1, but I don't know anything about the input that's not revealed by that fact. So there are numerous inputs that would give me 0 and 1. It could be that I had 0, 0, 0, 1 for input, or 1, 0, 0, 1, or 1, 0, 1, 0. There are many other inputs that would lead to the same output, and I have no idea which of those that I had. And I manage this whole computation. I can do this on thousands of gates. This is in a more complex way than I'm showing here, but with advances in garbled circuits, you can actually do this very, very efficiently. Again, for something which is an AES, the entire AES function, you can garble in about 2/3 of a millisecond, and you can evaluate in about 1/3 of a millisecond. Okay, so this is very practical, and this is what we use to do this BIP derivation. So you compute this SHA-512 value without anybody actually having the secret that was used. So I'm not going to go into how we do that. Let me just skip that. Yeah, so we can do this BIP derivation, but once again I want to stress, and this is just, I'm not going to say how we solve it, just to stress the issue. Why are we doing this BIP derivation? We want to back up a master key and then derive keys all the time, and we know that as long as the master key is backed up, everything we derive will be fine. But MPC is something that secures the process of computation. It doesn't prevent anyone from inputting incorrect inputs. So if we want to do a computation here to see what who earns the highest salary in the room without revealing anything, okay, we could do that, but I could just input $1 billion and it would come out higher and no one would know that I cheated. Right? No one would know, or you could know that I cheated because it's not very believable that that's me, but no one would know no one could prevent, the MPC itself doesn't prevent me from inputting incorrect inputs. And in this setting, if we're doing this key derivation, a corrupt party could purposely input an incorrect value. The result would be correct elliptic curve key. I could do the signing and everything. But if those keys are lost and I went to the backed up master key, it wouldn't give me the correct private key that I need to get the money back. Okay, so we have an additional mechanism to enforce this, to enforce correct input. But what I want to stress, and what's very important to stress, is that unfortunately MPC is not yet an out-of-the-box technology. Like it still requires expertise. There are subtleties involved that also knowing which protocol to take and how to take it, and issues like this. We're not there yet. I hope within a decade we will be there, but unfortunately it still requires expertise in order to get all of these things right. Additional components that we have, proactive security, where I said that we want to be able to have a situation where we essentially reshare. You'd have to corrupt an entire quorum at the same time. So we can do this in a very nice way. Remember that the sharing is just a polynomial p, where p of 0 equals the secret value. In order to reshare, what we can do is generate a new random polynomial, p prime, where p prime of 0 equals 0. So it's just a polynomial that is 0 on the axis, on the x and y axis. It hits actually it's 0 on the y-axis, and then, but otherwise it's random. And then we just add the shares into the shares that we already have, and this generates a brand new sharing. And so if an attacker gets some of the shares beforehand and others afterwards, they know absolutely nothing. And we can use the same method also to reshare in order to replace parties. So if a party leaves, we just have to reshare by adding this random polynomial, and their share becomes completely useless. And if a party joins, so someone joined the company, we just give them a new point on the polynomial. And all of these are supported in what we do. Okay? So I want to, don't have much more to do. What I want to show you is a little bit about how we can do threshold signatures in MPC. And I'm specifically going to explain with Schnorr and not with ECDSA, because Schnorr happens to be much more MPC friendly. And again, it's not, so it's closer to RSA. The idea is these are Schnorr signatures. You have a random value x is the private key. The public key is x times g, where g is this group generator. It's not that important, just there is a relationship between these values. To sign on a message, you choose a random k and compute r, which is k times g. Then you hash the message and this r value, and then you compute the signature as k plus e times x, and you output e and s. Right? It's clear to everyone why this is a secure signature scheme, right? No. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but that's not what's important. The nice thing about doing MPC is you say, I only have to be as secure as the signature scheme. So I just need to emulate this signature scheme in MPC. The reason why this is secure, it's a few hours work. Okay, so up on the right-hand side, you can see the signature scheme, just so you can track. We want to do distributed key generation, so the idea is to somehow compute x times g without anybody holding x. Very easy. Each party chooses a random xi, and publisher sends to everybody pi, which is xi times g. You just take p1 through pn and sum them together, because this respects the operation, the addition operation. That sum is what we call x times g. That's the public key, and the private key, each one holds their own value. You have to do something more here to make it secure, but I don't want to go into the details. This is enough to get the feeling. In order to sign a message, we do the same thing. Everybody chooses a random ki and publishes ri. You sum all of those together to get r. Then each party locally hashes to get e. And then they can compute si, which is ki plus e times xi. And you sum all of those together. And when you sum all those together, you get that it's exactly the sum of all the k's and the sum of the x's. So it's a linear function, so everything just works nicely. Okay? Unfortunately, not everything is as nice as this, and this also isn't really as simple as what I wrote here, but it's not that far from it. And one can prove that you cannot forge and everything is fine. For threshold ECDSA, actually this was a long-standing problem, to have distributed key generation that was efficient together with distributed signing. We've solved this problem. We had a paper recently to do it. I just explained why it's difficult. This is ECDSA signing. You have this same R, which is K times G, but the equation has the inverse, K inverse. And this is no longer linear. So one thing people often think is, okay, what's the problem? You showed me how to do all this stuff using garbled circuits. So just translate the inverse computation into a garbled circuit. The problem is that a circuit for doing that inverse is millions of gates. So thousands, even tens of thousands of gates, I have no problem, but even hundreds of thousands, but millions and millions of gates is going to be very inefficient, so we have to use a different protocol. So we have a new protocol that does this, and that's actually what we're using also in our product, and it supports all of these operations that I talked about. Before I finish, I want to say something which I think is very, very, very important. So we've talked about cryptocurrency protection and a platform for crypto assets, digital assets, all of these sort of things. But this is not the only place we have that problem. If you remember earlier, I talked about delivering a corrupt version of iOS to all the iPhones in the world. So I'm pretty sure that Apple has a disconnected machine for that, okay? But certainly not everybody does, and in many cases you need to do code signing on a regular basis. You're issuing updates quite regularly, and even then, even within the organization, you have to have code signing because every group has to sign. And just as with the exchange scenario where sometimes it has to be more protected and more complex and sometimes it can be less, the same thing is true also of code signing. And you can use exactly the same infrastructure we've talked about here to have that in order to sign on code that's going to be delivered to customers, you need the head of R&D and the head of QA and the head of operations in order to sign and approve that operation. Or you may want to have threshold in case the head of R&D is on vacation. So you need the head of R&D or 2 out of 3 of these team leaders or something to that effect. But you can define whatever you want because MPC gives you the flexibility to define whatever you want and you can get protection. Here's from a long time ago, March 25th, 2019. Asus software updates were used to spread malware exactly through this type of attack. Okay, here, stolen dealing certificate was used to digitally sign spying malware, and so on and so forth. Okay, so in summary, and this time I didn't run over time. I did 58 minutes and 23 seconds. I'm going to drag out my last 1.5 minutes. So we presented a combination of threshold signing and MPC techniques to give a really comprehensive platform for protecting cryptocurrencies and other digital assets. It provides strong protection not only against key theft, but against fraudulent key usage, which is crucial in this setting. And it's suitable for the entire spectrum of wallets, exchanges, and custodians, and also for other scenarios like code signing or CA. If you have a CA, the certificate signing certificate of the CA is something that is not used that often, and you would want to protect in a much stronger way, and here you can do it in an online manner. And includes other things like verifiable backup, online-offline authorization, key derivation, practical key generation signing, the kitchen sink, it has everything. And again, the high security that we get is based on a model of separation that always one needs to take into account when deploying the technology. You also have to deploy it in a way that gives good separation. In these kind of scenarios, it's quite straightforward. So thank you very much, and I have 25 seconds that I gave you more in replace for the half an hour that I went overtime last. Just second versus a minute. Thank you very much.